If you didn't catch last week's episode, we ended it with a talkback section where we answered a question on difficulty in video games. We addressed the topic kind of at face value, so we kept the discussion within the scope of whether or not games should have multiple levels of difficulty within them, and whether or not developer intent should be something that's considered when making the decision about whether or not to include difficulty levels within video games. We argued that the conversation around accessibility was a separate one, and because we didn't feel like we were qualified to have that discussion and we were not up to date in terms of our research and we're all able-bodied gamers, we felt like we didn't want to wade into that discussion without a representative, and so we didn't. But we realized that that was actually a mistake on our part on the show live last week, that we showed some ignorance around that issue that we wish that we didn't, and that ignorance caused some frustration, anger, and hurt with members of our community. And we certainly heard you guys when you said that during the segment and then afterwards in the really great discussion happening on the Discord, where there was just tons of back and forth between people debating this issue, bringing up interesting things to read and listen to.
Sharing links of like other people out there in the industry who are like amazing influence, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we spent the last week reading that stuff, listening to that stuff, watching that stuff, having quite a few conversations amongst the five of us as well about that episode. And we came to the conclusion that we have built a platform that's designed to entertain and also to inform people about video games. But sometimes, Steph, we are the ones that need to be informed as well. So that's why we're changing up the show a little bit.
That's right. We've got some guests on the show that we're going to start with. So that's really exciting. I'd like to introduce Cameron Hopkinson. On the show, they are a game accessibility consultant, composer, programmer, co-founder of Accessibility Unlocked, an Australian and New Zealand initiative to support game developers with accessibility needs, and also Ashley Ringrose, who is the studio head of SMG Studio. So welcome, guys. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Howdy.
Thank you.
How's it going? Solid rap sheet, by the way. Yeah, I know. Totally, I know.
Yeah.
The list goes on.
We all feel quite pathetic. The one thing that we do.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you guys. So thanks so much for joining us. Maybe you could just start by telling us a little bit about yourselves and what it is that you do in video games. Maybe Cameron, we'll start with you.
Cool. So yeah, I'm a composer and a programmer, but I'm also an accessibility consultant, and I'm currently doing that for a game called Wayward Strand, which is a game adaptation of interactive theatre that is being developed in Australia, and it's been pretty fun to work on.
Cool.
What else? Or is that good?
That's awesome. I mean, I don't know that I've played interactive theatre.
Yeah, no, I haven't. I haven't played interactive theatre before. Is it? Do you actually get to like help guide the story, or it's more like a visual novel style thing?
It's kind of visual novel-ish. Interactive theatre is it's not a game thing. It's a style of theatre that involves audience participation and audiences walking around a space.
Oh yes, no, okay, yeah.
Oh,
So a little bit of Bertolt Brecht.
Oh yeah.
Bit of breaking the fourth wall.
Yeah. We did one. Remember that was based around Telltale Heart.
Yeah.
Oh right.
Yeah.
No, who was the
Edgar Allan Poe.
Edgar Allan Poe. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Oh, that's really incredible. And Ashley,
what's that one called again? I think that's one of the main inspirations of this game, like structurally.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, great.
I know the one you're talking about, but I'm just blanking on the name.
I think the version I'd heard is some people in a New York apartment that walked around and had cocktails all night and things went wrong. And I'm like, that just sounded like a bad party. But they said it was interactive theatre, so I think it was just a cover by the end of it. But very interesting aspect to take and put into games as well.
And Ashley, studio head of SMG Studio, amazing things coming out of your studio. I really enjoyed moving out. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're working on and what you guys do there?
Yes, I'm the studio head. Previously to that, ran a digital agency, and so we just finished moving out. We've got Sping on Apple Arcade, No Way Home on Apple Arcade, and we also do Risk with Hasbro. So that's kind of the staple of games we have running now. We're working on a couple of things that are quite secretive now, but yeah, I think
You can tell us.
yeah, that's
What's the back shelf? Everyone dropping secrets and like, there's something on the shelf behind you. Isn't there?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, you're doing a Phil Spencer right now.
I wish I could. I'll give you the project names. I've got Project Russia and then Project Journey. And so both of those, like, we're quite proud of those code names because when you work it out, you're like, oh yeah, that's really one of those like smart ass code names. But yeah, two projects now.
Unlike Project Natal, what was that about with the Connect?
Yeah.
Well,
Christmas.
we're happy to have you here because we wanted to sort of talk a little bit about the importance of accessibility, which has become a quite a necessary conversation in video games, the full scope of which is still not fully understood, I think, by the broader gaming community, ourselves included. So what does accessibility look like beyond the more obvious things, I suppose, like adaptive controllers and things like that? Maybe Cameron, we'll start with you.
Cool. So designing in an accessible way is trying to ensure that as many people as possible can play a game. So things such as disability and stuff like that don't get in the way. This can include additional features such as subtitles that will allow deaf players to know what is actually going on in the story. But this can also include designing features in such a way that they're more accessible. So for instance, Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, the original version had puzzles that involved coloured tiles on the floor, which were pretty unplayable for colourblind players. So on the remake on the Switch, they added symbols to the tiles so that you could differentiate them even if you couldn't based on their colour.
Yeah, cool.
Amazing.
At what point, like Ashley, at what point in the process does that start to happen? Obviously, it can happen in which we saw with Breath of the Wild. Obviously, that can happen, or was it Wind Waker? Sorry, with re-release. But where in the process does that come into play for you guys at SMG?
I think for moving out, it came probably like halfway through when we realized, we had some decisions to make, and subtitles, color blindness are probably the most top level, easiest ones to kind of address, because we're all aware of those. And yeah, having puzzles or elements that are purely color based, and then you go, oh, you have to like make sure you don't paint yourself into a corner with that and go, all right, this needs to be symbol based as well. So you want to do it as early as possible, just to avoid, kind of designing yourself into a corner. We added for moving out, we added the like adaptive difficulty as well. So outside of subtitles and, making the user interface larger and smaller, we also added the ability, because we had kids playing and they were having trouble. And so accessibility for us was not just people with who don't have the full range of abilities, but also just the full range of players as well. And, we try to be more adaptive in terms of like, let people choose how they wanted to adjust it. So you might just want more time, or you want it to be, less stressful. So we add, we take away some of the dangers or slow them down. We let you just skip a level if you get stuck, because, as much as you want to make something as easy or as accessible as you can, someone might just not get it. So we allow them to skip it. And so, it might seem like really obvious things, but we took a lot of inspiration from Celeste from that, which had an adaptive difficulty and, kind of a message up the front, like, hey, we want more people to be able to play through this game. And, I think that's the best part of these accessibility things, is everyone's stealing off each other, standing on the shoulders to do a better job. It's not, people trying to show how smart they are by like, look at the things we did. It's like, oh, I took it through here. I think, The Last of Us 2, when you're Naughty Dog, you can raise the bar as high as you can. They went to town. And I think it's good, that have that bar raised and go like, well, that's the benchmark. And what can we take from those ideas to put into our games?
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say to Cameron, like, do you find those examples make it a little easier for someone like yourself who's, consulting with some of these things that can be taken into games as factors that can help and improve the development process? Does having more examples or better examples like that make it easier for to explain what kind of features developers should be looking to employ?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of good resources out there, such as game accessibility guidelines. and other such things that can be really helpful. But just having a really wide knowledge of accessibility in games in general can be really helpful with making games more accessible. This is because sometimes accessibility features don't necessarily come from an accessibility-based place in the first. And that sometimes you can look at features that other games have done, not necessarily for accessibility purposes, and repurposing them to make your games more accessible, if that makes sense.
No, totally. Yeah. The unintentional sort of like push forward in the industry that people go like, we didn't realize we were helping in that process, but like it all adds up at the end of the day kind of thing.
And can you talk to us, Cameron, a little bit about Accessibility Unlocked and how you became involved with the organisation and what sort of things you're doing to help educate, I guess, developers on accessibility?
Cool. Accessibility Unlocked was initially primarily based on accessibility for developers, so workplace accessibility and that kind of thing. I am disabled, I have autism, and I found that a lot of game development spaces were just not really accommodating for that. And I figured that I can't be the only person having that kind of trouble. So I was introduced to a few people and we decided to form this group. As far as game accessibility goes, we help with that by sharing resources that we find and giving talks on making games and workspaces and stuff like that more accessible.
Ash, I wanted to ask you as well, because we arrived at this conversation when we sort of chose to discuss difficulty settings in games as something that we had previously thought were somewhat separate from accessibility, but they often go hand in hand with one another. So I guess, how do you approach difficulty as a developer in sort of trying to deal with, I suppose, creating challenge within your game and also making it something that is accessible to everyone?
Yeah, I think Cameron mentioned the accessibility guidelines on the website. That has a really great, really detailed list of what you can do to make your game more accessible. And by reading that, we saw it's not just, some of it's just cognitive, ability. So it's like, have you got puzzles, or do you have things that are, someone can be quite good at, action, but not good at cognitive puzzles. And so difficulty is kind of like, it's not just a linear, is it hard or easy? It's across all different things. It could be reaction times. It could be, cognitive puzzles. You've got ones like, color-based type things. So for us, it was, for moving out and even moving forward, it's like, how do we break down difficulty into the various different things that people could get stuck on? Whether it's time, they just, want to take their time through it. Cognitive ability, we can remove puzzles, or just letting people skip directly. You've also got, controller complexity as well. Do they have to hold this button and do that button and press that at the same time? So can you make those things easier? So all those things add up to difficulty. So for us, it's all about, letting people choose what they want to change to make it easier. Than just saying, easy, medium, hard. Because a lot of the times in, say, an action game, that would just be, you do more damage and enemies are easier to kill. So we want to let people choose the fidelity, which, I think Celeste did really well. So you can have unlimited lives or, those type of things. So I think that for me is just when you're planning the game, it's like, how can you break down this game in terms of like, what would be the friction points? And, someone can toggle that off. So look, we won't have, such a short timer. Or, if we've got a puzzle, let people skip the puzzle. There'd be people that would really enjoy, Uncharted games, but don't want to solve the puzzles, even though those puzzles are quite easy. But, just let them choose their flavor of how they want to play through it. So that's how we kind of approaching difficulty is like, what are the different facets that make up that? And as we're designing levels for moving out, it's always like, okay, if we do this bit, we can always make that easier for players. Like instead of having two things that emit fire that kill you, we'll just have one or have none. And just let that toggle off, and that's the kind of less danger element. So yeah, a lot of it's just breaking it into the various elements so people can kind of customize their enjoyment. Than just saying easy, medium, hard, because what's easy for me might be hard for someone else, and vice versa. So
Yeah, one of the things that I made a connection to when I was watching a bunch of content over the last week about accessibility options, and one thing that I never made the connection to was like I've played Forza, I've played sim racing games and stuff, and the detail in how you can break apart how hard a sim is something that I just kind of took for granted. But the fact that we're seeing those kinds of like options, systems, like kind of breaking apart a game into its like base systems, like Celeste did, is really cool. Once I saw that connection, I was like, oh yeah, this is totally something that is that could be implemented in a bunch of different games in a bunch of different scenarios. And it's like it's so synonymous with Sims because Sims are inherently like too realistic to be fun. You know, if you put it that way, but there's so many games that can benefit from those little the tuning system of a sim.
And
that's a great example. I remember going to the arcade in Daytona, and it's always like, "Do you want manual or auto?" And I was always like, "Just the auto." I just want to like.
To be fair, I always picked auto, but pretended I was driving manual. So that was one of those features. No, but as Pete said, those complicated games like Sims, I'm sure Ash, you obviously being a developer know this, and Cameron as well, seeing the process. Every game is still built out of a really complex system of things happening at one time. So there's a lot to still break down. It's not just like, oh, your game is cute and colorful, therefore it can't have different aspects of it taken apart and rebuilt in different ways. So obviously, and you guys are a testament to that. So it's obviously like, it's lovely to have such a great example of that isn't Flight Sim or Truck Simulator or something like that.
Yeah.
And Cameron, do you see people...
The Sim example... Oh, sorry, I was just saying, the Sim example is really good, and a lot of it's just planned to bring to the user interface all those elements that they can customize. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say how difficult is it to kind of implement these things from like a budgetary point of view? And Cameron, do you see people do you see a resistance to kind of making these changes, or are people pretty open to sort of diving into the process of trying to pick apart the game in a way that allows them to implement a lot more detail in terms of accessibility?
Yeah, there can be some resistance. Part of that is if you look at games like The Last of Us and stuff like that, you can tell that a lot of money was put into the accessibility features of that game. And there are plenty of indie devs out there that look at that and just go, we cannot afford to do that. But a lot of accessibility features can be implemented quite quickly. For instance, there's a game out there called Year of the Clockwork God. One of the developers of that game implemented a bunch of accessibility features surrounding the dialogue system of that game, and it took him about a day.
Do you think and do you think that, because I think one of the games that we spoke about last week, and I think it's one of the games that comes up all the time when you talk about difficulty in video games, is Dark Souls or Souls-like games. And I think I made the argument that the point of that game is to be difficult. It's not like... There's a bit of a badge of honor playing that and like having persevered through that. It's not necessarily that you're good at games, but it's like you just were sort of like stupid enough to bash your head against the wall for 50 hours and actually finish it. But do you think that a big step forward could be a game like that implementing some sort of like slider system when it comes to like being able to lower difficulty, where it is like the icon that people stand behind to go like games should be hard, and then a game like that comes out and it will force people to rethink that kind of behavior? Because certainly my argument was like the intention of that game is to be hard, but I hadn't factored in the fact that like what's hard for me, the challenge that I enjoyed getting out of that might be too difficult for someone else, but if you lower difficulty settings, it's not making it easier for that person. It's just bringing that same challenge to their level. So yeah, do you wish that you would see something like that with that kind of title?
Yes. Miyazaki, the creator of Dark Souls, said that the design intent of that game was to persevere through challenge and come out the other side. If people can't come out the other side, then that's not really matching that design.
Yeah.
Ethos.
Absolutely, yeah.
If people just give up.
Yeah. And I know Dark Souls 2 almost had an easy mode. I think it was budget that kept that from happening. I do think it is important to say, though, that easy mode is frequently brought up when accessibility is raised, but that's not necessarily what accessibility is. There are plenty of accessibility features that don't really affect difficulty. So, for instance, the colorblind stuff that I was talking about with Zelda earlier, that change, adding symbols to the tiles so colorblind people can solve that puzzle, that would not impact the difficulty of players that are not colorblind at all.
Yeah, totally.
So,
And even things like, it's not about necessarily how hard the game is, but giving options like changing the speed that the game runs at. Things like that, I don't know how hard Ash would know how hard that is to implement, but from an engine perspective. But things like that aren't if you're thinking about the purity of a Dark Souls experience, they don't impact that. They just make it accessible. They just make it possible.
That enemy's still going to swing the weapons as many times as it has to attack you. It just
and you're just tuning it to your own ability.
Totally, and as Nick said, it's bringing it by no means bringing the difficulty down. It's just making it the same level of challenging that you and I might feel, but for someone else that is that same level. And I think it's more of an evening out rather than a bringing down, which is where the discussion can sometimes sound like it's not heading in the right direction. So. And as you said, it's really interesting to see not just sort of your straight difficulty sliders, but I'm sure, Cameron, as you said, interesting examples of games, sometimes unintentionally coming up with things that are benefiting larger player bases that then can be implemented. And Ash, as you said, how early on in the process you can say, look, we need to keep these things in mind because they're not that hard to put in if they... they're not as hard from day dot versus, well, we've made our game, we can't change it now, which I'm sure, Cameron, you run into all the time. So, yeah.
And do you think that's like a mindset thing as well? It's like once it becomes like systemic that accessibility is an important part of the development process from day dot, it's not something that's being asked to be added later. It's something that is built into the whole process to make it. I could imagine some resistance is like, oh, we were done and now we're not done. But the idea of thinking about all of these things as the development is happening obviously just makes it a much more streamlined process at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's where the remasters have that ability to change things because all the hard work's done. Well, a lot of the hard work's done, and then you can go back and add things later. But I can imagine for Dark Souls, it's already a successful franchise, so they're like, well, why risk? If we make it easy mode or we change it anyway, are we going to risk the success? Who knows? They may sell a lot more. So I think it's tough when you already have success. It's like, well, I don't want to change the formulas, so I don't want to do that. So yeah, it's a tough one for them, I think. And then if you do at the end go like, well, let's just add some sliders to make things easier or slower or change some things, you then have to kind of QA the whole game again with all those kind of set to the extreme. So the more fidelity you give, the more the more bugs that can come out of it. So I mean that's an excuse for them, but I think they like wearing that badge of honor that makes it the game's very hard. But I feel they could easily just change a few things to, open up the audience. Do it 1 year later. Say, we want the purest form. You can come back a year later. Or, yeah, I think as long as you leave people, let them have, this is the artist's intent, and then, hey, open up the other options. I really don't see the harm in that. We had that with moving out. It's like if you open up the assist options, do we still give people all the achievements? And it's like, well, why not? We're not trying to say this game's doing the assist mode is cheating or anything like that. So let them have it. So I think it is a mindset thing. The biggest change would be from the platforms enforcing it. I don't think you can get away. They enforce load times. If your game doesn't load or doesn't reach a certain frame rate, they're not going to pass cert. I think it's going to get to the point where it's like, if you don't have subtitle options or you don't have remappable controls or you don't have certain things, if the platform said we have a 2-year window where your games need to have these certain accessibility options, that would really force a lot of change where the game will not get onto these platforms unless they reach these certain benchmarks.
Yeah, right. In my mind, my mind went to publishers, and publishers not releasing funds or releasing more funds to make sure there's accessibility options. But yeah, you're right. Like the platform holders at the end of the day are running those certs, and they have all the power in the world to make it happen. So yeah, it'd be nice to see those things at that end.
You only need, and it's just 4, Nintendo, Sony, Xbox, and Steam. It's only 4 people need to enforce that change. Yeah. So it would make a huge difference, I think. And they could also say like, oh, if you have, like, you could say you can pass without it, or we'll give you an extra 3-4% royalty.
Yeah, right.
If you do this, so like they can incentivize it that way without, and I think some studios would be like, wow, I'll take an extra 3%, revenue just by adding these features. So you can kind of, I think you either have to penalize people or you have to incentivize them. Otherwise, just hoping that they do it, please, it would be great. I don't think we'll drive enough change quickly enough.
People are too terrible for that.
What would an extra 3%? What would an extra 3% do for Project Journey?
No, was it Project Russia?
Oh yeah, right. I mean that's that's like it's 10% less. So was it 10%? It makes a difference. Like you would definitely jump through those hoops.
Totally.
And if you were like if you jump through like 8 of the 10 hoops, you'd do that extra 2.
So it's a hoop jumping game.
Mile. Exactly. There probably will be hoops involved.
Well, we can't thank you enough for coming on the show and talking to us tonight. Honestly, it's been awesome to have you here and being part of the discussion. So thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. We really appreciate it. So that was Ashley and Cameron. Yep. I'm so glad that we managed to get them on the show. They were so willing to come on, and
Cameron's obviously in New Zealand, so like an hour later?
Yes.
2
hours.
It is
2
well
hours.
and truly bedtime.
It is. Thank you so much.
No way to live. I'm not happy that last week happened, but I'm happy with the outcome that the last week, I guess, that we've gone through.
Sometimes that's the only way.
Yeah.
Sometimes
totally.
that's how things just go in life.
Well, like Ash was saying, you either incentivize or penalize, and it's like that's where you learn from, right? Like, and you make a mistake, and then you go like, okay, now, because I think it's so true of what they were saying, and Pete, what you mentioned about the idea of it being like a mindset thing, about how I had kind of just gone, difficulty to me is it's fine for games to be easy, but it's always like easy compared to my skill level or like our skill level. And even things like the slowing a game down, but keeping everything else the same as being something that never would enter my mind as being like something that anyone would ever need. And now I've done so much reading where it's people going like, oh my God, I would play video games if they
And as you said, that challenge for them is still there. It is still hitting the ceiling.
It's the same challenge, exactly. Yeah. So, I feel like that was, I'm really glad that we got that discussion.
I think for me, it's like I was happy to dismiss a very small percentage of games being hard for the sake of being hard as something that wasn't for me. But there are plenty of other people who are like, but I want this to be for me.
We have the choice whether it's for us or not, whereas they don't even get some people don't even have the chance to say that wasn't for me.
Which would be even better now if they're like, we've got that there. It's like, I'm not still playing a Dark Souls game. It's a stupid game. Like, some people might just not want to play that.
Yeah, totally. And also a really big thank you to you guys as well for all of the discussion in chat last week, but particularly on the Discord over the last week. There's just been some really amazing back and forth there, sharing of information, sharing of viewpoints. It's been so respectful and civil the whole time, which I think meant that it was so informative as well. Like being able to take that stuff on board, but in a way where it was not people attacking each other. It was people explaining their position and really wanting the other side to understand and not wanting to be right. I think that's what it was. Wanting to share that knowledge and not be like, no, you're wrong, and you have to admit that you're wrong. Because there were people on all sides of the coin. There's only 2 sides of a coin. So all sides of the thing with a lot of sides. At the end of it, I think only positive things have come from that discussion.
And like I said at the start, the ability to have those discussions and then share research, share media on the internet, share articles, share a couple of really really amazing streamers who do gaming with disabilities and that sort of stuff as well. It gives you the context to be able to go out there and appreciate those viewpoints as well, rather than just have that, like, I don't know, back and forth discussion with someone that can feel like an argument. So again, a massive appreciation to everyone who was super generous with all of that as well.
Yeah.